Well, thank you for coming out. Let me open this up in prayer. Heavenly Father, I do thank you for the beautiful day and this beautiful autumn week that we've had, and just a great privilege it is to enjoy your creation. Father, I thank you for this school, for Caldwell Academy, and for our students, our parents, our teachers, and staff members. I thank you for the great privilege you give us to do this kingdom work here and to help educate and raise up this next generation. Father, I pray that you will bless our time here tonight, that it will be fruitful and edifying for all of us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay. Mark Guthrie used to do what he called State of the School addresses. And apparently, the first few that he did, he would have standing room only. With each one, there would be fewer and fewer people, to where, I think his last one, there were 2 people. So he began doing them on video and put them on the website rather than doing them in front of the public audience. And that often happens when a head of school's been someplace 3 or 4 years. Kind of sound like a broken record. The attendance dwindles. Plus, I know our lives are crazy and frenetic. I left to go to Burlington this afternoon to watch my daughter in the conference, cross country championships, and then sped back here to make sure I got back in time. So I know what that's like. So thank you for coming out. I did change the title. I kind of felt like State of the School Address is a little bit boring. Who wants to come out and hear something with that title again and again and again? And so I'm actually going to begin with just a few benchmarks, kind of where we stand on a few areas, just a few areas, and then a little bit about where we're going. But I'm going to skim through that pretty quickly and get to the meat of what I want to talk about, and that's raising up the next generation, raising up our children in really pretty precarious times. And so I want to make a note that Monday, November the 2nd, and Tuesday, November the 3rd, I've set aside from 7:30 in the morning until 5:30 in the evening, both of those days, 20 hours in 20-minute intervals where I have no appointments, no meeting. My door is open for you to come in, and we're not as...
If they call me to schedule it.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. So that we don't have 12 people there at one time. You need to schedule with Renata, and you'll have 20 minutes, and if nobody is scheduled after you, you might have 40 minutes. And so if you don't have an opportunity or don't feel comfortable asking your question here tonight, you have that opportunity. But anything is fair game, anything you want to talk about. And I will do that in the spring, winter or spring as well. I'll set aside a couple of days that we can just chat one-on-one. And my door is always open. You can schedule times to meet. But I felt like 2 full days, 20 hours, that my schedule is free for you. I might encourage you to look at those 2 days. So that's Monday the 2nd and Tuesday the 3rd. Okay. I think it's important to always... Oh, my photographer is upset because I'm moving. Stuck in the middle. I assured him I would not move. It's important to look at our mission in all that we do. Our mission statement should guide every course we teach, every extracurricular activity that we sponsor, every club that we sponsor, every program, every assembly, everything we do really should tie back to the mission statement. So I want to briefly just remind everyone of our mission statement. I also want to point out for you grammarians, there are no commas, semicolons, or periods anywhere except at the very end. The mission of Caldwell Academy is to assist parents. Now, many of us put a period there, or a semicolon, that the mission of Caldwell is to assist parents. Our mission is to assist parents from a biblical perspective in the instruction of their child by providing, very specifically, a classical and Christian education. So all that we do, our partnership with you, is to do just this, from a biblical perspective in raising up the next generation. The education of our children through a very Christ-centered and classical form of education. So this is gonna tie into some of my comments that I talked about here in just a little bit. We created about a year ago, the board and I created a vision statement, and if we do our mission correctly, appropriately, then the goal is we'll be able to accomplish our vision. Wisdom, virtue, and service to the glory of God. Caldwell has a unique mission and a unique vision, and it's not often in the 21st century that schools talk a lot about wisdom and virtue. That's what schools always talked about. For centuries and centuries, that was the goal. But no longer is that the goal for schools. But it is our goal. So that's, I want you to keep that in mind as well. Number of us, a handful of parents, number of teachers, administrators, and the board came together last school year during the winter and spring and polishing it up over the summer, created a new strategic plan. Every 4 or 5 years, a school should have a new 5-year strategic plan. It's a long-term plan. And so ours is hot off the press. You got a link to that last week in Eagles Call. And it is now posted on our website. I'm not going to go over this in great detail because you can read that on the website and as well as the link. But we do have 7 goals. Each goal has a set of 5, 6, 7 initiatives. It is not comprehensive of everything that we desire to do over the next 5 years. The strategic plan hits on just certain major areas, and so that's what our plan seeks to accomplish. So we're now in year 1 of the 5-year plan, and so the 5th year is the year 2020. So it is the strategic plan 2020. We're calling it Be Thou My Vision. Kind of a play on that. And so I'm going to just briefly give you a snapshot of our 7 strategic goals, but not our initiatives. We're going to go through these pretty quickly, but just maybe as a reminder to pull up that off the website. And if you have questions, please give me a call or shoot me an email or come by and talk to me. We'd love to entertain questions you might have about our strategic plan. So the first goal has to do with financial. You'll see some alliteration. Each of these goals starts with an F. So that was not my idea. So ensure stability and sustainability of the mission through updating our long-term financial plan. Has to do with meeting certain independent school management objectives with financial stability and forecasting. And so we do have a number of initiatives associated with that. The second goal, facility, and it has to do with our master campus plan. And in case you didn't know, we are in a $12.3 million capital campaign, the Sharing Our Lives campaign, to build a student life center. We can phase that, so the first and second phases are $8 million. So to really accomplish that is in the 5-year plan, as well as to look at future phases, not completing those in the next 5 years, but really fully developing those phases on paper. And then our third strategic goal, the third F, fundraising, and to promote a culture of philanthropy, and then to look at our various stakeholders throughout the Caldwell community and the Greensboro Triad at large to try to cultivate stewardship. And just a footnote, not only are we in the midst of the capital campaign, every year we have an ongoing annual fund. Now, Caldwell is extraordinarily unique nationally among independent schools. Very few independent schools, even those that are 100, 200 years old, with large endowments and $20,000 and $30,000 a year tuition, schools typically do not plan on a balanced budget. They plan on tuition and fees covering about 96, 97% of your operating budget, and you raise funds for the rest of it. That way it keeps tuition a little bit lower and you get a tax-deductible contribution to meet that gap. And so if you're at 96 or 97%, you are considered having an A+, an A++. And 100% is just not very common, especially in schools in their first 15 or 20 years of operation. And Caldwell, in its first 15 years, had 100% operational efficiency each and every year. Extraordinarily rare. That meant our annual fund was just kind of gravy. It would buy special things, but it didn't meet the operating budget. But then enrollment dropped a little bit, and our operational efficiency, that tuition and fees, what percentage of the budget that covers, is about 95%. So many schools around the country would covet that, but it's a little bit tougher for us because we're not used to it. But it means we rely on the annual fund to pay teachers, to keep the lights on, to buy library books, pay for athletic uniform, all those things that we do annually. So, and that's different than our capital campaign. Our fourth strategic goal is enrollment and retention. We currently, and it changes almost daily, we just added a new student today, anticipating another couple in the next week, and possibly some more, but we are at 684 students K through 12, down from about 750 or so was our peak. We were one of the fastest growing schools in the country. We went from 67 students to 750 students in 15 years, 16 years, and putting us in the top 5 or 6 of the 300 or so classical Christian schools in the country in terms of enrollment. But we saw a dip to 680, and we're climbing up a little bit. Strategically, our goal is 780. That's not adding any more sections, it's not building classrooms at a larger school. It's just filling up every section, every classroom that we currently have would give us 780. And then our preschool, which is just a little under 150, strategic goal to hit that about 160. And how to better market the school to improve both retention and new admissions. And so again, a number of initiatives there. Our fifth goal has to do with faculty. This is perhaps our most important strategic goal. School revolves around students and teachers. And all the administrators, we have several administrators in this room, we can just all quit today. And the school continues because it's about the teachers and the students. And so my commitment is to hire and retain the very best teachers that I can possibly hire and retain. And then that we spend money developing them. And we're privileged. We have an outstanding core of teachers. And I want to keep it that way, and I want them to get even better and better. And there is turnover, that we're able to hire the very best. And so we have a number of strategic initiatives having to do with professional development, evaluation, and compensation as well. And the sixth goal, fundamentals of the classical curriculum. We are an outstanding academic institution. We're very pleased with the success over the years of our Christ-centered classical curriculum, but we can always improve. Schools should never be stagnant, resting on their laurels, but always striving to improve what we do. And so we We have a specific goal with a number of initiatives to improve how we're doing in the classroom with our curriculum, our instruction, and looking at specific, well, really across the board, all of our curriculum and subjects, but in particular, some particular disciplines and areas. And you can look at those initiatives again on the website. And, we want to make sure that we have a well-planned and well-executed curriculum. I know it's kind of wordy. It's all Renata's fault. She put it on the slide. And our final goal, the feasibility of alternative learning styles. As you know, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, we created the Academic Resource Center, it has been a work in progress, and it has improved and expanded the services that we're able to offer with each passing year. And we are very carefully considering how we might meet the needs of our students, on both ends of the spectrum, in terms of their particular learning abilities. And so we are carefully evaluating the scope of our work. Again, I do encourage you to take a look at that strategic plan, and whatever questions you have, please come and talk to me or shoot me an email, whatever you feel comfortable doing. Again, I mentioned that we are in the midst of our Sharing Our Lives campaign, and we are at approximately a commitment of $4.1 million and counting, and our goal is to complete this first half of the building. If we have to phase it, is about $8 million, so we're over halfway there, but money is coming in every day, and we anticipate that number growing by leaps and bounds in the coming weeks. So it's exciting. It's more than has ever been raised in any campaign in the history of Caldwell, and that's been really 14 months, so very blessed at how God has provided His abundance. And there are some folks who said that anything over a couple $1 million would be impossible, and we're just a little over a year in it, and God has blessed us with $4.1 million, so that's exciting. Just a few stats. The last 3 years, 90% of our graduating seniors have been accepted into their first choice of colleges. A wide range of schools, from in-state, out-of-state, public, private, Christian, secular, highly selective, just the whole gamut. And our class of 2015 received just under $4.2 million in merit college scholarship money. That's not need-based, that's all merit, which is the highest per capita of any school in Greensboro, at least. I didn't check Winston-Salem or High Point. But per student, about double what any other school in Greensboro got. And so they're being accepted typically into their first choice of school, and they're getting a lot of money. And so your tuition is an investment, but it's far more than a financial investment. We'll talk about some of that. Just this week, I was checking SAT scores outside of Greensboro. Last year's class had the highest mean average SAT score and the highest middle 50% SAT scores of any school in Greensboro. And I checked several of the top schools in Winston-Salem and High Point, and ours were the highest in the entire triad, unofficially anyway, from what I could check. So our students, that get to that senior year and graduate, are scoring well, they're being admitted well, and they're getting a lot of money in the process. And year after year, they tell us how well prepared they are, that they can write better, they can think better, they can articulate their thoughts in debates and speeches, and across the board. It's not just in writing and humanities, but math, science, that they're doing quite well. But I would argue that these are but a small part of what we do. And that's some of the things that I'd like to talk about. I will mention, outside of academics, our athletic program and our fine arts are doing wonderfully well. From both of those, we have a well-recognized drama, studio art, and band, and chorus, and just across the board in fine arts, just exceptional. And our athletics, last year our girls varsity sports teams won every single conference championship, and our boys won several. At the middle school level, we won several conference championships, and we're starting this year the same way. And we have been in the top 3 in the state of independent schools athletically for, I think, 7 years running in total athletic accomplishments. So, we're doing well in the classroom and out of the classroom, and yet that's not why we're here. It's not why I'm here. That's part of what we are called to do as a school. But going back to that mission statement, and going back to our vision statement of creating or fostering and developing young people that will leave here not just to go to college and not just to be prepared for a career, to make money and have a family or whatever, but how are they going to fare when they're doing that? Will they be young men and women of moral courage and virtue and wisdom? And so I want to talk a little bit about that. What is the end of classical Christian education? What is our future? What is our vision? Is it merely high test scores and college acceptances and state championships? We can say, check, we've done pretty well in that regard. Or your students have done pretty well in that regard. But we take a longer term view, a more eternal view. In today's age of relativism and our rapidly changing cultural dynamics, our children, your children and my children, are facing challenges that might appear to be quite challenging. When they leave our classrooms, they go off to college, career, churches, families. Will they be prepared? We need to remember that this world is not our home. This world is not their home. We and they are resident aliens. We should all have a green card. We are, and your children are here on earth for a blip on the radar screen of eternity. So, what will matter while they are here? Is it their SAT score? Is it the college they went to? I would argue it's much more than that. We need well-educated resident aliens who can take every thought captive for Christ and not be prepared for merely college and career, but to develop into a generation which will possess moral courage for combat on the front lines. And I'll repeat that. To develop moral courage for combat on the front lines. To be men and women of moral courage, godly wisdom, and Christian virtue. To accomplish such biblical goals, we need to teach and to parent from a position of faith and not fear. So that's going to be the key thing I'd like to talk about. And this is not a lecture to you. This is a conversation I'm having with myself and our teachers and my spouse and all of us, because we are in a partnership. We go back to that mission statement. We're assisting you in a biblical sort of way in educating your children in a very specific sort of way. And so in order to do that, we need to have mutual trust and mutual faith in one another, and most importantly, we need to have faith in our sovereign God in the way that we educate and parent. There are two competing views in our culture today, two competing visions about what the purpose of education is. One is that education is to form citizens of the state, to support the economy, to drive consumer capitalism, a very utilitarian, kind of pragmatic, consumerist. That is the progressive model of education, to produce technocrats. And ours is another vision, and that is to form citizens of God, to form resident aliens. So I think we need a broader vision, and we need to think not just about me and my child. We need to be leading and parenting out of both peace and faith, and not out of fear. A few trends and statistics, some of them perhaps a little bit alarming. Our current children and young adults, this next generation, various studies have suggested that as many as 75 to 80% of the 18-year-olds who profess the name of Jesus Christ after 4 years of college no longer do. That includes graduates from Christian homes, Christian churches, and Christian schools that have professed the name of Christ at 18. Nearly 80% no longer do when they graduate from college. Also, college and high school suicides have skyrocketed in recent years. I read an article just the other day, some of you may have seen it, that in North Carolina, for young people, I don't recall the age span, but they described it as young people, that just in the last 5 years, suicides have doubled. College campuses, Appalachian State, Wake Forest, William & Mary, have had an abundance of suicides in the last few years, like tenfold more than what they were 10, 20, 30 years ago. Eating disorders, cutting, depression, anxiety have all increased many, many times in the last 20 years. ADHD, ADD is so pervasive in our generations today, and that could be a whole other talk about why that is. But it is multiple times more than it was when most of us were growing up. Interesting, with some cultural norms, there has never been a single recorded case of ADD or ADHD in the Amish community. Interesting, I wonder why that is. Eating disorders are virtually non-existent in inner city African American communities. Columbine type shootings have virtually never happened in inner city black communities. Gang violence, you have tremendous violence in some of those communities, but not the same type of anxiety-ridden violence of the middle and upper class suburbia. So there's something unique in the 21st century in the middle classes and upper classes, in particular the suburban areas. Former Dean of Stanford University, Julie Lythcott-Haims, explained in a book and also an article some of the trends that she has seen the past decade. She noticed a disturbing trend during her decade as Dean of Freshmen at Stanford. Incoming students were brilliant and accomplished and virtually flawless on paper, but with each year, more and more of them seemed incapable of taking care of themselves. At the same time, parents were becoming more and more involved in their children's lives. They talked to their children multiple times a day when they were off at college, swooped in to personally intervene anytime something difficult happened. From her position as at one of the world's most prestigious schools, she came to believe that mothers and fathers in affluent communities had been hobbling their children by trying so hard to make them succeed. and by working so diligently to protect them from disappointment and failure and hardship. A recent Caldwell graduate, I know that after her first 3 weeks of college, she and her mother had either talked on the phone or texted an average of 20 to 25 times a day, each and every day, her first 3 weeks in college. This is a great kid and a great mother. You know, we didn't, maybe there's some young people, younger than me. When I was in college, of course, cell phones were not invented. I went off to college August the 18th, 1977, and I saw my parents at Thanksgiving break, and I think I spoke to them on the phone maybe 4 times in between. And I didn't change my sheets, I remember that. I did bring them home. I was a freshman boy. I just thought they were supposed to be good for the year. I brought them home. My mother bought me new sheets. I wash them at least every couple weeks. But I didn't have my mother texting me 17 times a day to ask me if I washed my sheets. I learned, oh, you have to wash those things. We live in a different world. Such over-helping might assist children in developing impressive resumes for college admission, but it also robs them of the chance to learn who they are, what they love, and how to navigate the world. This dean, Lithcott Ames, says, we want so badly to help them by shepherding them from milestone to milestone and by shielding them from failure and pain. But overhelping causes harm, she writes. It can leave young adults without the strengths of skill, will, and character that are needed to know themselves and to craft a life. And I would argue as well that this is not a biblical pattern of parenting. Lithcott Ames is one of a growing numbers of writers and scholars, including quite a few others, who are urging stressed out helicopter parents to breathe and loosen their grip on their children. And this is not just for college kids. It starts out of the womb. And you're building, we are building our kids when they go off to college in one direction or another. Our job as a parent is to put ourselves out of a job. We need to know that our children have the wherewithal to get up in the morning and take care of themselves. So, am I a helicopter parent? Is my wife the helicopter? She's not here, so I can. Lithcott Ames gives 3 benchmarks. I mean, there are many other scholars and writers that will have other criteria. She just lists 3. 1, check your language. She says, if you say we when you mean your son or your daughter, as in we're on the travel soccer team, it's a hint to yourself that you are intertwined in a way that is unhealthy. Maybe, do we have any senior parents in here? Some parents of seniors? So maybe this was one of you, I don't know, because I don't know who said it, but just in the last week we had a senior parent tell either Mr. Greer or Ms. Gasmarian that we are about finished with our college application. We just completed our essays. Well, we are not applying for college. Your child is applying to college. Give them the responsibility and the dignity to do it themselves, to own it. So check your language. The second thing, examine your interactions with adults in your child's life, she argues. She says if you're arguing with teachers and principals and coaches and umpires all the time, it's a sign you're a little too invested. When we're doing all the arguing, she says, we are not teaching our kids to advocate for themselves. And her third point that she has no commentary on other than the one point is stop doing their homework. Just 2 weeks ago, my 9-year-old Charlie in the 4th grade, it's 8 o'clock at night, and he says, Dad, I left my Latin book at school. I said, Charlie, what's your point? He said, well, you have a key to school. You know where my desk is, right in the right-hand side. I said, no, Charlie. I said, I'm the only 4th grade dad who's the headmaster of the school. I'm not getting your Latin book. If you get a 0 on your homework, you get a 0. He said, well, Dad, that's not fair. That's sorry. I would rather you get a 0 in the 4th grade and learn a lesson. Now, I must add, we do live in the 21st century. He is creative. He got one of his buddies, probably Matthew Lapierre, I'm not sure, but took a screenshot of the assignment, and he was able to still do his homework without his Latin book. But at least, you know, being creative. But we can't just bail them out every time that they need help. So how can parents help their children become self-sufficient? Teach them the skills that they'll need in real life. Give them enough leash to practice those skills on their own. Have them do chores. Teach them a sense of accountability, life skills, self-discipline, work ethic. Another recent article in Psychology Today, Declining Student Resilience, a serious problem for colleges. The author cites that emergency calls to counseling centers at universities has more than doubled over the last 5 years. Students are increasingly calling, seeking help for, and apparently having emotional crises over basic everyday problems. One particular school, recent examples mentioned, including a student who felt traumatized because her roommate called her that name. And 2 students who sought counseling and called 911 to get the police to come out because they saw a mouse in their off-campus apartment. These are the norms. Faculty at this particular college noted that students' emotional fragility has become a serious problem when it comes to grading. Some had said they had grown afraid to give low grades for poor performance because of the subsequent emotional crises they would have to deal with in their offices. Many students said that a C, and often even a B, was a failure. And they interpret such failure as the end of the world. Faculty also noticed an increased tendency for students to blame them, the faculty, for low grades. You were not explicit enough in telling me what the test would cover, or what would distinguish a good paper from a bad one. They described an increased tendency to see a poor grade as a reason to complain, rather than as a reason to study more or more effectively. And the training grounds for this starts here early, not just in college. The head of counseling at another school sent an email to his colleagues, included this sobering paragraph. I've done a considerable amount of research and reading in recent months on the topic of resilience in college students. Our students are no different from what is being reported nationally on the state of late adolescence, early adulthood. There has been an increase in diagnosable mental health problems, but there's also been a decrease in the ability of many young people to manage the everyday bumps in the road of life. Whether we want it or not, these students are bringing their struggles to their teachers and others on campus who deal with students on a day-to-day basis. The lack of resilience is interfering with the academic mission of the university and is thwarting the emotional and personal development of students. He also mentioned students today are less resilient, and that they are less resilient, and the needy students have shaped the landscape for faculty that have to do more hand-holding, lower their academic standards, not challenge the students too much. We have a couple college professors in this room. They might be able to share similar. I won't put you on the spot, but they say that students are afraid to fail. They do not take risks. They need to be certain about everything. For many of them, failure is seen as catastrophic and unacceptable. external measures of success are more important than learning and autonomous development. Faculty, particularly young faculty members, feel pressured to accede to student wishes lest they get low teacher ratings, not get tenure. Another article from the Chronicle of Higher Education entitled An Epidemic of Anguish, Overwhelmed by Demand for Mental Health Care in Colleges. Families often expect campuses to provide immediate, sophisticated, and sustained mental health care. After all, most parents are still adjusting to the idea that their children no longer come home every night, and many want colleges to keep an eye on their kids just as they did. Rates of anxiety and depression among college students have soared in the last decade. Many students are struggling with what campus counselors say are the usual stresses of college life. Bad grades, breakups, being on their own for the first time. There's also, in looking at younger kids, there has been a dramatic decline over the past few decades in children's opportunities to play, explore, and pursue their own interests away from adults. Among the consequences are well-documented increases in anxiety and depression, and decreases in the sense of control of their own lives. We have raised a generation of young people who have not been given the opportunity to learn how to solve their own problems. They have not been given the opportunity to get in trouble and find their own way out, to experience failure and realize they can survive it, to be called bad names by others and learn how to respond without parent intervention. So now, here's what we have. Young people, 18 years and older, going to college, still unable or unwilling to take responsibility for themselves, still feeling that if a problem arises, they need an adult to resolve it. Students have not developed skills in how to soothe themselves because parents have solved all their problems and removed every obstacle. They don't have as much grit, one writer says, as previous generations. That we have become a helicopter society. So if we want to prepare our kids for college, or high school, or middle school, or anything else in life, we have to counter these social forces. We have to give our children the freedom which children have always enjoyed in the past, to get away from adults so that they can practice being adults. That is, practice taking responsibility for themselves. Another article by a woman named Jessica Leahy entitled, Parents Stop Hovering. It's not your job to remove every obstacle from your kid's path. She argues that we have taught our kids to fear failure, and in doing so, we have blocked the surest and clearest path to success. Out of our love and desire to protect their self-esteem, and I'll interject my own parenthetical point here. If we think for a moment, you know, in today's society, self-esteem is one of the top values that schools place on educating kids. It's what our culture tells us. We need to build up their self-esteem. And think about what that means. Self-esteem means to esteem yourself. Is that biblical? We are called, and here at Caldwell, we are called for our students and all of us in the community to esteem others, and principally to esteem God. Not to esteem ourselves. Not to train up a generation of narcissists that it's all about our self-esteem. Now, there's a place for self-esteem. It's not all bad, but if that is kind of the end game of education, I think we've missed the boat. We have bulldozed every uncomfortable bump and obstacle out of their way, Leahy writes, clearing the manicured path we hoped would lead them to success and happiness. Unfortunately, in so doing, we have deprived our children of the most important lessons of childhood. There are setbacks, mistakes, and failures we have shoved out of our children's way, are the very experiences that teach them how to be resourceful, persistent, innovative, and resilient citizens of the world. So we are teaching and training our children to be helpless and to fear failure and have lives of anxiety. Instead, we need to allow them to develop courage to try new things, explore their boundaries, climb one branch beyond their comfort zones. The race to the top starts when children take their first step. And in our helicopter society, doesn't end until they reach their career goals, their socioeconomic mobility. Our fear doesn't just cause us to over-parent, it makes us feel overwhelmed ourselves, parenting out of fear. One of the results is in 2012, 36% of adults aged 18 to 31 still live with their parents. And these numbers are not just associated with the economy. They've been rising for decades. So in order to raise healthy, happy children who can begin to build their adulthood separate from us, we're going to have to extricate our egos from our children's lives and allow them to feel the pride of their own accomplishments. Had many conversations with my former board chair, our school in Roanoke, who is very good, very successful Christian family psychologist, and he says that, and he has seen over the last 30 years thousands and thousands of teenagers as well as parents, and all of these things that I've just described. He says that high school kids that are depressed and anxious and suicidal and eating disorders, etc., he attributes it completely, almost completely, to the fact that parents have removed every obstacle. They've never had little failures because parents have taken them away. And then when they're 17 and their boyfriend dumps them, they're suicidal, or they have an eating disorder, and that they haven't been allowed to have failures and obstacles. And so we need to have not fear-based parenting and teaching and educating, but faith and grace-based parenting. Fear-based parenting, we are scared of everything in the world that might influence our children, and that fear determines our strategy for parenting. This is true in the Christian world as about as much as in the secular world. And this type of fear-based parenting takes on different forms. I won't go into detail of those. If you're interested, I can share those with you and share some articles with you. But one author lists 7 different types of fear-based parenting that has taken the joy out of both parenting and stealing the joy from kids as well. And so we should strive here at Caldwell to not be about fear, but faith in our sovereign God and trust in one another. We have to have a partnership with each other to successfully raise up this next generation. And it starts in infancy and in the kindergarten all the way. Certainly we're concerned about through the time they leave Caldwell, but even on thereafter. Cell phones. I talked about the young lady who she and her mom would text and call every 30 minutes throughout the day away at college. But in our middle school and dialectic school, students are not supposed to have cell phones out. They're supposed to be in their locker and turned off. But students are pretty sneaky under the desk texting mom. And Adam Greer and I have joked several times that the emotional level of our middle school children, it changes about every 10 minutes. And that my little Anna in the 8th grade, we'll just use her as an example. You know, first period, she gets a 52 on a science test, and she sneaks her phone out and she texts her mother. By the time the class is over, the teacher goes to sit down on her computer for 2 minutes, and there's already an email from Mrs. Cox. Why did you give my daughter a 52? I demand an answer. Well, then second period, you know, some young man winks at her. Well, she's forgotten the 52. She's high on a cloud. But then third period, then she gets 100 on a test, and she's even higher. And then fourth period, she finds out the guy who winked at her was really making fun of her. So now she's ready to... And at the end of the day, now a girl wouldn't do this, but a boy at the end of the day gets in the car, and mom says, "How was your day?" And they just might grunt. "Oh, it's okay." But today, because they're texting mom's emotions are going up and down with the middle schooler. And they're emailing the teacher, and then Mrs. Cox is going to email the boy's parents because he winked at their daughter, and then she's going to email him again because he was being mean to their daughter. It's constant. We need to kind of keep a check on our technology, as well as, you know, just let the kids kind of live their lives. I'm going to give a couple of examples, biblical examples and historical examples. Samuel, the Old Testament. As a barren woman, Hannah knew that her only option was to pray to God. She felt like an outcast as a motherless wife, and took her time in the temple as a chance to pray for God's blessing. The answer was her son Samuel. Fulfilling her vow, she gave Samuel to Eli, the high priest, so that her son could serve God. Samuel's difficult beginning shaped his life as a prophet of God, leader in ancient Israel, and anointer of kings, Saul and David. If Hannah had not released her son to God's work and into his protection, Samuel would not have lived God's full will in his life. His childhood in the temple built his faith at a young age, instilling in him a love for the Lord that guided his ways. Hannah had faith that God would lead her son when she could not. So in the same way, we must release our children into God's will. We can use examples. The apostles were high school and college age, predominantly, we think. We don't read of their parents. They were released by their parents to follow the living God. Jonathan Edwards, the greatest theologian in American history, graduated from college valedictorian at the age of 17 and gave a 2-hour address in Latin, and nobody thought it was a big deal. For much of American history and world history, you went off to college at 14 or 15. You went off to fight in wars at 14 and 15 and 16. You didn't have anything called extended adolescence. You didn't have 31-year-olds living in their parents' bedroom, not parents' bedroom, their old bedroom, working at Starbucks as boomerang kids. It has only been in the last generation or so that there's been this failure to launch. And I'm out of time, but I'm going to just briefly mention a great book just came out this year by a fellow by the name of John Lennox. This first one here, Against the Flow, the inspiration of Daniel in the age of relativism. And about 4 or 5 years ago, heard him preach a sermon on this, and he turned it into a book. He's a PhD in mathematics, he's a PhD in history of science, he's a PhD in philosophy, and he has 5 master's degrees. He's a smart guy. He can also preach a sermon. But Daniel was, he was captured by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. along with about 1,000 other young men. But we only read of 4. And maybe we only read of Daniel and his 3 buddies, maybe because they were different and unique. What was their parenting like, and what was their training like? And essentially, in Babylon, they went off to college. They were given 3 years of intensive, what we would say, university training in literature, humanities, and science, in the best type of training in that part of the world at that time, about 500 BC. And they were able to remain steadfast and still rise to the top in their culture. We live in a very similar culture as that Babylonian culture. Daniel and his friends were able to have great respect and submit to the authority of a pagan king, Nebuchadnezzar. But they had moral courage and cultural bravery to stand steadfast, and God honored that. That is my prayer for our students, our children, because we are in Babylon as well. We live in a culture that is toxic, that has gone awry, and when they go off to college, and after college, they are being attacked right and left, and how will they stand? It's not going to be because of their SAT scores. And in Babylon, they worshiped many idols, just like we do today. Today, whether it was greed, sex, power, wealth, or college admissions, SAT scores, awards and accolades, that's not what our young people should be living for. They should be striving for the heavenly city. And we have modern pressures but ancient practices. And we aspire to create and cultivate habits in our young people. We must pray and rejoice over our children, showering them with God's blessings every morning and every evening, having faith that angels will protect them when we cannot. We need to rejoice over our children, and we need to release them to the Lord in His sovereign care. They will need to have moral courage. They will need to have wisdom and virtue to be change agents for Christ in this challenging world. And my prayer is that we can come together, partner together, to put them on that road. And so we need to pray over our kids, and we need to have a trusting partnership with one another to do that. I only have 3 more hours, but I'm going to stop. I wanted to stop at 7:40. I apologize. You'll probably all want to leave at this point. It's 8 o'clock. But if anyone would like to leave, you may do so at this point. If you have questions, comments about this, or you can certainly set up a time to come see me. This is not a time to say, I really don't like Anna's geometry teacher. But really, if you want some dialogue about this, I'm going to do some more of these that will be really much more dialogue oriented and less lecture oriented. But questions?